Okay, you can all hear me. Thanks very much for the introduction, Chris. So yes, my name's Sam, and here I'm appearing in my capacity as the president of Giving What We Can. So Giving What We Can was one of the organisations that Tara mentioned. I'd really like this to be... Oh, sorry, is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I can... can't use it well. Okay, how's that? Does that sound okay? There we go, much better. All right. So, as I said, Giving What We Can is one of these organisations that Tara mentioned. And basically what we do is we try and build a community of people who are giving more and giving more effectively. So what this talk is about is taking action to solve the world's biggest problems. So as Tara said, we don't just want to make effective altruism either about just talking about, making a difference. Hang on, that's working, there we go. Talking about making a difference, we want to take action. We think that taking action is really important. And so the work that we do is not just focused on finding the best causes, it's also working out how to act upon them. So there are many, many different ways to help. So if anyone wants to raise their hands, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but what are some different ways that we could help in the world? If you want to make a big difference, what are some things that you could do? Tara's mentioned a few, so you can cheat and use some of those, but so... Okay, so change our consumption. Yep.
Use your talent in a wise way.
Yep, using your talent. So whether that's because you can contribute skills to solving a particular problem or working on a particular problem, whether through your career or through the information that you tell other people. What else? Yeah.
First, educating yourself about what the problems actually are.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the first thing that you might want to do to take action is to learn which actions to take. What else could we do? Keep doing this. Yep. Anyone else? Yep. Volunteering, right? Okay, so you can volunteer your time. So even if you work in a field that maybe you think doesn't do as much good as you want to do, you can find an organisation and you can donate some of your spare time. So there are lots and lots of different things that you can do to help. Usually we'd sort of break them down on things that you can do with your time. So we've heard about using your career and using that time to make a difference, or volunteering. But the good thing that you can do with your time is that you can convert it into money. So when you go to your job, you make money, and then you can donate that money as well. So these are some different things that you can do to help. So we want to figure out first of all what we should do with that. Now there are thousands of good causes out there. As Tara said, we can look within our own communities. We can see that our families and friends need help. We can see that when we walk past people on the street who might be sleeping rough, when we hear about people in our communities. But of course, we know that there are causes all around the world. And the thing that I want to emphasise is not to say that, this is not trying to diminish or take away from the fact that there are people who we know who are suffering, people in our own communities, causes that we already know, that we're already fixed upon. We're just trying to say that these are all very important. So the point is, which one are you going to choose, and how are you going to make that decision? Now, the way that most people make a decision about which cause to focus on, which charities to give to, which careers to choose, if they want to have a big impact with their career, is semi-random. So who's been on the street and someone's come up and they've had a clipboard and they've said, hey, donate to this charity? You've heard this? Yeah, a few hands up. No, okay, a few more hands going up. You're all very shy. I'm very friendly. If you need to, put your hand up, it's fine. And has anyone ever signed that? Has someone given money to someone who's come up to them on the street? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, of course. So have I. So but you have to say that that's just donating to something that happens to be in your immediate field of view. You're not considering among all of the different charities. It's the one that happens to be right in front of you. So the question is, do you want that to be the process by which you choose, which causes to work on? Or do you want to choose it in a way that's a bit more systematic? So I think the first step is figuring out what you care about. What are your values? What do you want to do in the world? And it's the thing that you want to do to help people. And I think, we've sort of gone through this a couple of times now, but if the thing that's important to you is the helping, then that's the first thing that you should focus on. And then from that, you can work out how to act on those values. So what we end up seeing is a lot of people sort of do it the other way around. There's a cause that's come up to them, whether someone's come up to you on the street or maybe a friend was fundraising for a particular cause, and that's going the other way. That's choosing something and acting on it without working out whether that's actually doing the thing you care about, which is helping a lot of people. So what I'd really like people to take away from today is think really hard about what you want to do with your lives, with your careers, with your money, and work out whether that's whether you're able to actually achieve those goals with the actions that you're planning to take. And if you think, well, maybe I'm not going to achieve as much as I possibly could, then at least consider thinking about different ways that you might approach things. So I think the thing that we need to do is first of all work out which actions are going to make the biggest difference. So as we learned from Tara, there are some actions that make some difference, there are some actions which make much more difference, and there are actions that make very little difference or in fact have a negative impact. And the trick is that you can't always tell from the outset, intuitively, which of these is going to be which. You know, that story about, well, the best way to keep people in education in Kenya is to give them deworming pills. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think of that, but that's what the evidence, at least for that particular geographic region, shows. The other thing that you need to think about is which actions can you take? So, of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of different causes that you can work on, but you've only got one life. You've got a particular set of skills. You've got a particular set of interests. There are things that you can do. So you have to, first of all, match up. You know, you have to think about which actions are going to make a really big difference. And you also need to think about, well, which ones can I make the biggest difference on? You know, if you're particularly good at, say maths or computer science, that might mean that you work on, you know, helping out a research task or something like that. Whereas if you're a really good communicator, maybe instead of doing that, maybe what you do is you raise awareness. So thinking about your own skills and the context that you're in and the people you know and your networks is also really important. We had a question at the back.
Yeah, I was wondering, also from the previous presentation, is there a way to find out about these researchers on effective...
Yep, absolutely there is. So Giving What We Can's website is a great resource, but also effectivealtruism.org. What I'm going to do at the end of the presentation, I'll put some web addresses on there, and you can take a photo or you can put it into your browser, and then, yeah, this will point you in the direction of the research and of some of the causes. So basically what I wanted to talk to you about today is what are some of the biggest problems in the world right now, and how can we act on them? So, as we've said, effective altruism is these two steps. It's figuring out how to do the most good and then doing it. So, thinking hard about what we should do and then actually taking action. So, if you walk out of here today and you think, okay, what's the next thing that I can work on? Well, these are some ideas. One of the things... Oh, actually, I've gone too far. It doesn't matter. That's all right. Okay, I'm just going to go back. But yeah, so just some of the biggest problems in the world right now. I've unfortunately just jumped the gun a bit and given you a couple of ideas, but apart from, just pretend you didn't see those two slides. Can we get some ideas for what some of the biggest problems in the world might be right now? Yeah. Corruption, okay, yep. So corruption means that, particularly in developing country contexts, it means that money that should be going to do good things is actually siphoned off and doesn't make it there, yep. Migration, okay, so migration is something that you could conceive of as a big problem for some parts of the world that don't have the capacity to, take on new migrants. But you could also think of that as a big opportunity because one of the biggest ways that we can actually improve economic development is by, sharing skills, sharing resources across the world. And actually, what we find is that, countries which have migrant diasporas, they send some money back to their home countries, and that actually, in the form of remittances, creates big economic opportunities and can actually, there's billions of dollars get sent across the world that way. So actually migration can be seen either way. Yep. Humanity. Okay, so, yeah, right. So, you could go that sort of broad scale. There are a lot of things that, humanity does that maybe if you were to look at it from the perspective of the planet, you might think, yeah, maybe we're doing some things wrong. Yep. Hey. Factory farming, okay, yeah, excellent. So, we've got some more.
Mental health.
Mental health, absolutely. So, one thing that we often think about is, for example, we should help people be healthier because they'll be happier. But of course, if we can just target them being happier in the first place, then that's actually really that's addressing some of the root causes. So, huge problem, and very undertreated in the developing world in particular. We've got lots and lots of suggestions, but I am under a time pressure, so I'll keep moving on. But I'm very happy to keep talking about this after. But so one thing that we might think is a really promising opportunity is poverty relief. So over here, this is a slide from Charity Water, and they're doing, they're helping people access safe drinking water. About 650 million people worldwide lack access to safe drinking water. This is an Anopheles mosquito, so I'm sure you've heard of malaria. So being in poverty makes you more susceptible to different diseases and less able to access treatment for them. As Ramon points out, animal welfare is a big problem. So because there are so many animals that are in factory farms, it actually means that there's a big opportunity to help by ending some of the cruel practices that go on. And I know that Tobias is going to talk in more detail about this after the break. And of course, there's global catastrophes. So this here is a picture of a makeshift hospital in a warehouse. So does anyone know about the Spanish flu pandemic? So of course, I mean, here in Flanders, of course, there's a big history associated with the First World War. But of course, most of the deaths that occurred at that time were actually caused by the Spanish flu. So you think about how big a cataclysm the First World War was, and then multiply that number. 50 million people were killed by the Spanish flu in 1917 and 1918. So what happens now if we have another pandemic illness? What if new and emerging biotechnology was to create a virus that no one had any immunity to? What would happen then? Could we see could this affect 50 million, 100 million? Our world is much more connected now. What about climate change, where we'll know that sea level rise as the water, thermal expansion of the water means that sea levels are going to rise. We're going to see, more storms, more flooding, more disasters. So this is obviously going to affect many, many people. So other causes that might be particularly promising: fundamental scientific research. So if you're like working on science and technology that could lead to a breakthrough. So, for example, quantum mechanics in the early 1900s paved the way for now we have computers. And so having that sort of fundamental scientific research means that now we can do things. Pure mathematical research in the 1970s means that now we have cryptography that means we can do bank transactions. And that kind of thing really helps the world in lots of ways that we can't predict. We can also just improve science in general, so trying to avoid publication bias and things like that, because science isn't always perfect, and we need to make sure that when we learn from science, we learn faster and we learn better. Other things could be mental health, neurological disorders, so as was already pointed out, depression, anxiety, and particularly in developing countries, because lots of developing countries barely even acknowledge that mental health is an issue, let alone having good treatment programs to deal with it. I mean, even in the developed world, we don't really deal with mental health, anxiety and depression very well. A very promising cause area. Some forms of cancer research seem promising. Tobacco control, particularly in developing countries, because we've seen good successes elsewhere, but tobacco can cause a lot of problems. Road traffic injuries kill thousands of people every year, cause a lot of suffering. In the US, it seems like at the moment criminal justice reform seems important. So migration, trade policy reform, so getting rid of harmful tariffs that make it harder for people in developing countries to access other markets and bring in more money. So all of those different things are just as kind of, here are some ideas for cause areas that we think are particularly important. But I want to make the point that these are not final answers, current best guesses. Ooh. Okay, I'm struggling to use a mouse today, aren't I? So the point with this, and I think the point that we need to take home about effective altruism is not that list of causes. Effective altruism is not about global poverty, it's not about animals, it's not about the far future, it's not about any of those causes in that list. Effective altruism is asking this question, why? Why do we want to help? And then using that to guide us. So this list of causes is not here because it's the final list. This list of causes is, given that we want to help a lot of people or a lot of animals, and given that we want to do so as cost effectively as possible, these are some areas that we think are promising. But always keep that in mind, because if someone came up to me tomorrow and said, well, actually, it turns out that there's nothing you can do to help people who are suffering from the ill effects of malaria, and we actually have this knockdown study that negates all the previous evidence. Well, first of all, I think that their new study was probably wrong. But over time, if we got more and more and more evidence saying that something is wrong, we should always be open to changing our minds. There's a word, the kind of the highbrow way of putting this is epistemic humility. Has anyone heard that phrase before? Yeah, so maybe some philosophers in the room. But the idea is being aware of what we don't know and realising that we could very easily be wrong. And so this is a really important value to hold, and I think people involved in the effective altruism community should hold this as their number one value. Always be open-minded, always be prepared to be wrong, always be prepared to change what you're doing if it turns out that what you're currently doing isn't the right thing. So yeah, so just keep that in mind as I talk through this. But we do have some very good guesses. And the way that we arrive at them is using this framework that we call ITN, or importance, tractability, and neglectedness. So this is not the only way that you would use to look at how to work out which causes are more important and which causes might be slightly less important. But it's a useful framework and gives us a good guide. So, for example, importance is how big is the problem? So, do we have two problems that affect about the same number of people? Are they just as bad as each other? Or does one problem really outweigh another? So one disease affects very, very few people, whereas another might affect millions. So a problem that's really big means that you have more opportunity to help. Tractability is how hard is the problem? So do we have a really clear way to success? Do we have a clear path? Or do we need to do more research to do that? Now, of course, this isn't an excuse to sort of say, well, we should only focus on easy things. It's not an excuse to say, well, we can't research to do more. It's simply to say that if we have a cause where, well, this is really easy and cheap to treat and we can do it basically tomorrow, and this one here is going to take 10 years of hard research before we even get close to understanding what the problem is, then right now, probably we should focus on the one that has the easy answer and then move on to the one that's harder to answer. And then the other thing is neglectedness. And this is really important, and I think this is one thing that people often forget, that it's not just about what's good to do in the abstract, it's also about what's good for you to do right now. So, for example, if there's a big charity like Oxfam or Amnesty International, Médecins Sans Frontières, these charities are as far as we can tell, they're probably doing some good work. But the question is, because they're already big, and because they have a lot of resources behind them, because, everyone in the room recognises those names, right? So, because they already have this, the ability to raise a lot of money and have a very big profile, it turns out that the causes that they're working on are already very well funded. But there are other causes which aren't as sexy or which have fewer people working on them. Tara mentioned parasitic worms. Not a lot of people think oh yeah, I really get excited about donating to people from parasitic worms. Malaria, for example, it's sometimes harder to convince people that this is the stuff they should be caring about because it's not this big disaster that's really wow, there was a tsunami or there was an earthquake. It's a slow disaster. And so we become desensitized to it, and so we don't have as many people working on it. And that means that you can actually get a lot more bang for your buck if you can make that cause bigger, if you can get more people working on it. So let's consider a particular cause. Global poverty. Well, we have out of the 7 billion people in the world, 1 in every 7, so 1 billion people, live below the World Bank's suggested poverty line of $1.90 a day. So if you upgrade that to $3.10 a day, and keep in mind these numbers aren't just what if you had $3.10 and then you went to a developing country, what you could buy for that. That's what you could buy with $3.10 if you lived in America. So imagine being in America, having to pay your food, your medical bills, your rent. You've got $3.10 every day. Of course you couldn't do it. So 2 billion people in the world live underneath that line. 1.5 million people die every year of intestinal diarrheal diseases. So these are diseases that are caused by lack of access to safe drinking water. Because a population about the size of Europe, so that's about 650 million people, lacks access to clean drinking water. So water and sanitation are really important. There are 200 million malarial infections every year, and that leads to about 450,000 deaths. So this is a killer that's like, you know, killing, and most of these deaths are children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. So we can see that, you know, working against at least some of the problems within global poverty is incredibly important, because the numbers aren't just tens or hundreds of people, it's millions of people affected, sometimes billions. Tractability just means how hard is the problem? Well, look, we have some good evidence that things work. So since 1990, the infant and child mortality is down 50%. That means there are, you know, half as many people who are dying before they reach their 5th birthday. Half as many people dying in childbirth. The number of people underneath that poverty line, even though that's, you know, a billion people, that's still a huge number of people, and we need to fix that. But that's hard since 1990 as the world has become more prosperous. We've done things to eradicate diseases like polio, like smallpox. Well, polio, we're down to about the last 10 cases. Nigeria's just been declared polio-free. So there are a few cases in the remote areas of Afghanistan, but basically we're on the way to eradicating polio forever. Polio used to kill hundreds of thousands of people every year. We've also just about eradicated guinea worm. So we do know that there are problems within this space that we can make progress on quite cost effectively. Eradication of smallpox, actually, which is, you know, this affects people all over the world, not just in the developing world, but it's estimated by some counts that costs about $5 to save a life. So that's, you know, it's incredible. It costs, you know, something like $1 billion over the course of the whole smallpox eradication campaign, and that saves like something like 50 or 60 million lives. Neglectedness. So just within this space, of course, global poverty varies a lot. So there are some issues where lots of people are working on them, but one thing here is the Bednet funding gap. This is just the amount of money that you would need to achieve full coverage of malaria nets in sub-Saharan Africa next year is about $200 million. So it's like, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. It's like, it's an amount of money that, yeah, I mean, you could conceivably raise if you were a government or a lot of people who are making donations. You know, it's a fraction of the money donated in the US every year. So, but there is still this funding gap. So people are missing this opportunity. So we'll talk about malaria. So let's think about, yeah, that as just one particular problem that you might want to work on. So the problem with malaria, as I've said, is that you get this thing. So this looks like it here. That's Plasmodium falciparum, and basically it gets inside your bloodstream, and it causes all kinds of effects. One of which could be that you get hemorrhages in your brain and you die, but it also causes fevers, chills, all kinds of unpleasantness. So there's a lot of suffering associated with it, and because you miss school, because of all of those kinds of problems, it means that you can have these compounding, long-lasting, long-term effects. It's spread by the Anopheles mosquito, so basically the mosquito flies around, drinks some blood from an infected person, drinks up the parasite breeds in their body, then when they go and infect the next person. So this here, I just want you to just have a look at this map. This is this is anti-malarial bednet coverage in Africa. So you understand what I mean by a bednet? It's basically, I know, I'm sure you've seen mosquito nets in films, or maybe you've used one yourself, but basically it's a barrier between you and the mosquito. But if you have, so anti-malarial bednets, basically they're insecticide treated. So not only do you have the physical barrier, so that the mosquito can't come and land on you, but when it tries to get to you, it lands on the net, and then the net's covered with insecticide, it drops dead, instead of going off and biting the next person. So they're actually a way of not just protecting you, but your family and your community. Now, what this map shows is that between 2000 and 2015, we went from basically like almost 0%, so very, very little insecticide-treated net coverage in sub-Saharan Africa, and all the way to 2015, so last year, we can see that actually we're starting to make quite good progress on this, almost up to 100%, say in Madagascar and parts of the DRC. What's happened as a result of that? Well, this is what malaria looked like in 2000. The areas show, like the yellow, are almost 100%. And by 2015, we can see that malaria has actually been brought down a huge amount. And anti-malarial bed nets have actually prevented about 450 million cases of malaria in the last 15 years. You know, remember, there's 200 million people affected every year. In 2000, about 1 million people, actually probably more than 1 million people, died every year from malaria. Now that's down to under 500,000. That's obviously still too much, but it just shows us that in 15 years, we can make really good progress on this issue, and this shows us basically, this is some of the evidence that shows that this is actually working. So this isn't just kind of coincidence. There's been a big study published in Nature, which is one of the top science journals, and basically what they've done is they've looked at all of the different malaria control programs, and they've said that basically bed nets, which is this green one, insecticide-treated nets, are responsible for a good chunk, something like 60%, or perhaps more, of the reduction in malaria. And the important thing about that evidence is it shows a causal relationship. So it's not just that at the same time as people were rolling out bed nets, something else happened. It's that bed nets are responsible for that decline. Now, what can you do? I mean, you guys don't have a lot of bed nets lying around, but if you have some money, you could give it to the Against Malaria Foundation, because a bed net costs, we think, around, probably under $5 to distribute. So that's not only the cost of the net, but the cost of the people to go out into the field and give the nets out, and also the cost of monitoring to make sure that the nets have been distributed and that people are using them. So Against Malaria Foundation, basically, so this is in Chao, in Malawi, and they've got these nets here. So this is a packet here is a net, and basically they take people in the village and they say, okay, well, here's a net. But they don't just say, okay, here's your net, on your way. They show you how to use it. So they say, this is how you hang this net to make sure that it covers your family, make sure that people know that the people most at risk in their family are the young children and the pregnant women, because in some places, men tend to sleep under the mosquito nets, but actually they're the ones least at risk. So making sure that people change their behaviours. And then you can also do other things, so you can make sure that the whole family is protected under these mosquito nets. And you can see the results. You remember that map. Basically, we've seen this massive reduction in malaria. So we think this is basically one of the most cost-effective ways that you can reduce human suffering right now, today. Because malaria not only kills people, but if you get cerebral malaria and survive, you might grow up and get epilepsy, and then you're stuck with that condition, and treatment for epilepsy is very bad in sub-Saharan Africa, in many places. So it's not just the deaths, although we have, as we said, averted about 500,000 of those every year, but it's also the suffering that goes along with that. So another problem that you might think is really important, micronutrient deficiency. So basically what this is, you guys have seen on the side of your milk or cereal, like fortified with iron and calcium or things like that, right? You've seen your table salt, it's got iodine in it. This is making sense, Yep, nods, great. So the reason that producers put that in there is because it makes sure that when we eat a balanced diet and eat lots of different things, it means that we get all the nutrients that our body needs to help us grow strong. It means that we get all the nutrients we need to make sure that our brain is operating at full capacity. You can see here, this graph is actually, this is an amazing website which is called the Global Burden of Disease, and what it does is it maps all the causes of suffering and disease all across the world. And basically, I'm just looking at low and middle income countries, and you can see here this huge chunk of the graph is actually taken up by iron deficiency anemia. This slide here is also iodine deficiency and underweight because of protein deficiency. So it's like this is all of the years lost to disability across the low and middle income countries, and you can see a huge fraction of that is micronutrient deficiency. But we have these charities, Iodine Global Network, Project Healthy Children, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and what they do is they go into developing countries and they work with governments. So they're not going in and just distributing food and disrupting local food suppliers. What they're doing is they're working with local producers and saying, hey, you're already distributing, maize or your corn or rice. Why don't you just add some of these, these micronutrients in? Because we know that they actually have a huge impact on people's quality of life. So, for example, iodine is one of the cheapest ways that you can improve people's IQ. They've done a study where they basically looked at areas in the United States which didn't have iodine in their groundwater and areas that did. And then they looked at admissions into the US Air Force versus the US Army, because the Air Force has a much higher bar for IQ. And basically what they saw is that as people started iodising their table salt, the people in the places that couldn't get into the military, so couldn't get into the Air Force before, ended up going, their IQ started coming up to the national average. And that's because iodine deficiency means that you have cognitive impairments and that you might actually, stunt your kind of cognitive growth. But it costs about 5 cents per person per year to implement this. So even people who are on $3.10 a day, that's like, you can still afford to pay for that if you're buying staple foods. So it's incredibly cheap intervention. And you can see here at a market, we've got some local produce that might have been fortified with these minerals. This is another promising thing in the micronutrient space. I don't know if there's an organisation that you can, so this is golden rice, but this is just sort of like a speculative thing, but I think it's really cool. This is fortified with vitamin A, so basically it's a breed of rice that takes up more vitamin A, and it basically means that vitamin A deficiency is endemic across sub-Saharan Africa and also most of Asia, but basically rice is a staple crop, and golden rice, so you don't have to change your diet, you don't have to change anything, but it means that you get your vitamin A intake. The other thing too that you might think is like, well, okay, people living in poverty, it seems like there's a lot of people from the outside who come in and tell them what to do. There's a lot of people, this sort of white saviour complex. You might be worried that, well, how do I know that the charities themselves are going to be doing the right thing? Now, I'd say that the charities that I've put up there against malaria, Iodine Global Network and the rest, they all work with local communities to make sure that, it's sort of being distributed by people on the ground. But I think a lot of people do have this sense that maybe it would just be better to give people money. Let people aren't surely the people who are best placed to know what people living in extreme poverty need are people living in extreme poverty. So one thing that you can do, this is just a picture of some houses with thatched roofs. So of course, if your roof is made of thatch, you don't have very much money because you've made your roof out of locally available materials. It's much better to have a tin roof. What this generally indicates is that people living in these houses are some of the poorest in the village. So what you can do is you can have a look in a satellite image and you can look at the houses and you can work out which ones have thatched roofs and which ones have tin roofs. And the ones with thatched roofs are generally the very poorest people in the village. And then there's an organisation called Give Directly, and they can send money to a mobile phone. So basically you don't have to go to a bank, you can basically go to a local person in the village who will give you money based on this mobile phone transaction. So basically everyone has a mobile phone, and you get a text message and it says, yep, you've been sent, however much. So in this case, they've been sent, 1,200 Kenyan shillings. And over the course of the year, you basically double someone's income. And that means that they have the ability to do things like, put a roof on their house that doesn't leak, and, invest in some of those financial decisions that they might not have otherwise been able to do. So we have, this is, if nothing else, you can just give money to the very poorest people in the world. And in general, you might think, oh, well, but what do people do with it? In general, people invest that in things that make their lives better. So what can we give? Okay, we want to work towards some of these causes, whether the charities that I've suggested there or some of the other ones that I've suggested, or maybe, as Tara suggested, there's a cause X out there, that we want to sort of research and try and find, because there's something out there that's actually much more important than any of the things that I've suggested here. So what can we give? Well, as I said, we can give our money, so that might be in the form of donations, could also be in the form of investments. So one thing that you might think is that some companies actually make the world a better place. So one example I have in mind is a company called Wave. And now remember I said that billions of dollars flow back from developed countries to developing countries in the form of remittances. So this is family members or people in the diaspora who earn money in a developing country, and then they send some of that money back to people in their own countries. And actually, a problem with this is that because it's quite expensive to send money overseas, if you've ever tried to send money internationally, basically if you can reduce the number of fees that come onto that money, you can actually mean that a lot more money is being sent. So there's a company called Wave. Now they're a for-profit company. They're able to make money. They pay all their staff and run all their technology and all the servers behind the service. But so investing in companies that work on technology that will greatly benefit people seems like a really, really valuable thing to do as well. So thinking about what you can do with your money might not just be about donating to a charity. It might also be about like, okay, well, maybe you can give money to an organisation that does this sort of thing. The other thing that you can give, of course, is your time. So it's not just that you can give away your money and not think about changing your behaviours, but the other thing that you can do is change the way that you spend your career. You can also change the way you volunteer. So these are other things that you can give, and with your career you can do things, all kinds of things. So it's not just about, I know that Chris was saying that a lot of people here go into working in government as a way of making a big difference. And that may in fact be one way that you can make a really big difference, particularly if you can make your government more effective. If you can, I'm seeing a few kind of like rolled eyes in the audience. Maybe that's people think that that's harder than it looks. I'd say that's pretty hard. I used to work in government. It is pretty hard to get people to do things more effectively. But that might be one thing that you could do. You could also go into research. So the only reason that we know how to treat malaria or treat intestinal worms or that micronutrients are an important part of people's diet is because people research them. So you might think, well, there are causes out there that need a solution. I'm going to be the person that provides the solution. And then once you have that knowledge, well, knowledge is really transferable. So you can tell other people about it and they can go ahead and they can do that. You can be an advocate. So whether you're working within government, whether you're working outside of government, whether you're working in the social sector, you can advocate for a cause. So by advocating for a cause that nobody knows about yet, but which affects hundreds of people, could be a really effective way of making sure that the attention that cause needs, that it gets it. So communication, the same sort of thing. If you're a journalist, for example, you might bring to light things, and just raising awareness in general. Yeah, we have a question.
Maybe I miss entrepreneurship here?
Yeah, entrepreneurship. So, I guess we could sort of, that's actually an excellent idea. So when you invest in a company like Wave, you're investing in someone being entrepreneurial. So that's an excellent point, and I'm sorry I've neglected to put that on there, because that is actually true. People coming up with new ideas, new products, new ways of doing things, which are really disruptive. And if you think about the way that we do things today with, instead of, so for example, the mobile phone example is really important. So, 25 years ago, no one had mobile phones, so you couldn't make a payment system on top of mobile phones. So innovations, entrepreneurship, disrupting the way that we currently do things, sometimes you can have a really, really big impact with that. So from this, I want to sort of think about like what the next steps might be. And so we talked about giving our money in the form of donations, and we've talked about giving our time in the form of volunteering and careers. And I'm going to point you towards two of the organisations that I work with, just as a way of kind of thinking about these problems. So Giving What We Can is one organisation, and Giving What We Can is a community of members who pledge to give 10% of their income to charity. Now 10% sounds like a lot, but you saw that slide that Tara had saying that if you're here in Belgium and you're on the typical income, you might be in the top 3% of the world incomes. If I have time, I'll actually show you how much that would change if you donated by 10%. But for most people, you'd still be in the same percentile. Maybe you'd be in the top 4%. And actually, what most people find is that doesn't turn out to be very much of a sacrifice. Donating money and donating a substantial amount of money isn't you losing money. It's you spending money on something that's really important to you. If you've got a cause that you care about and you know that you're helping people, and if you pick the very best causes, the causes that are backed by the most evidence, then you can be very confident that what you're doing is good, then that's actually really empowering. And it feels like you're making a big contribution. And that's borne out by psychological research, which suggests that people who give are actually, you get this increase in happiness, which is much more lasting than spending the money on yourself. So actually, you might not be losing the money, you might actually be gaining something, in addition to making a really big difference. And so we do this, we say, we have this pledge. So if it is the case that you think, that actually sounds great, I'd really like to start making a big difference, you can do this tomorrow. You can do this without changing the job that you work in, without making a big difference to your lifestyle, because it turns out that some of the things we buy don't actually make us that happy. This might, and we can actually have a really, really big difference, make a big difference with it. So the important points are at least 10% of what I earn. So it's a significant contribution, so you're giving more. But also where you can most effectively use it, so you're giving more effectively. And the idea is that by giving more and by giving more effectively, we put a lot of resources towards problems, we multiply the effectiveness of those resources by using it as effectively as possible, and then we can actually make a really big difference. And actually, giving what we can, so we've just, last month, crossed the 2,000 member mark. So we started in 2009. We started off as like the project of a philosopher at Oxford University. In the first couple of years, it was like 30 people, then 60 people, and now we've got 2,000 people. And 2,000 might not sound like a lot, but this is all over the world. It's growing every day, and together, this is just what we've done so far. $17 million donated, and nearly $1 billion pledged. So, well, I guess, 80% of the way to $1 billion pledged. I hope that in the next 6 months we'll cross $1 billion. So that's putting us on par with some of the biggest foundations in the world. Now it's democratically allocated, and it's people putting that money towards the things that they think are the most important. And so we have like a huge amount of money, and that's just 2,000 members. So think what we could do if people incorporated this into their lives. If everyone started giving more, we'd be able to do huge amounts. We'd be able to, be one of the biggest sort of sources of good in the world. And you don't have to change your career. You don't have to change very much about your lifestyle. So if nothing else, this might be a way that you could make a difference. The other thing I'll point out is a website called 80,000 Hours, which is also part of the Centre for Effective Altruism. 80,000 Hours, does anyone know what 80,000 Hours refers to? Yeah?
Sorry, I know 80,000 hours work for career advice.
Yeah.
Hours you get really good at something?
No, so it's actually, it's close, but so yes, they do give career advice, yeah?
Yeah, the amount of time you have to invest, like in your career.
Exactly. So basically, your working life, if you work a normal job, average working life, 80,000 hours is about the number of hours that you'll spend doing your job. So it seems like if that's that's a huge number, right? So how much time and energy and effort have you put into thinking about the career that you want? A couple of hours, maybe 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours. I mean, even if you put hundreds of hours into thinking about exactly how you could do the most good, and you change what you were doing so that you could have a bigger impact, you've got this huge amount of your career that you'll be working on problems. So if you can start out in the best, on the best possible footing, and then you can pick the careers that are going to have the biggest impact, then actually over the course of your life that's going to compound. And so investing up front in making really good decisions about your career means that you can have this huge payoff across the whole of your life. Now, we think it's the world's best research advice for ethical careers. I'd strongly encourage you guys to at least look at the website, because they have a huge amount of information just on job satisfaction. So even if you don't end up taking their advice on an ethical career, it's got really great advice anyway. But we think it's the best research advice for ethical careers. So if you are, I know there are some students in the audience, if you're considering a career, then this might be the thing to look at. And also if you're within your career, but you're thinking about where can you go next, what skills should I learn, then it's also a great resource. So the point is, I'll come back to that, make sure that you walk out of here with a plan for the next step that you're going to take. So has everyone's got a phone, right? Cool. Can everyone pull out their phone? Cool. So go to the browser in your phone, pick one of these web addresses, put it in there. Because, of course, I want you guys to walk away from this with lots of ideas, but what I want you to do is, like, when you've 2 days later, when you've forgotten about, everything that we've said to you today, I want you to open your browser and think, oh yeah, that's right, give it what we can. I remember, that seems kind of interesting. So if you're interested in making more of an impact with your donations, check out Giving What We Can. If you're thinking about how to make more of an impact with your career, think about 80,000 hours. Or if you just want more of an introduction into things, effectivealtruism.org links to all of this and gives you a bit more of an overview of things. And it's something that, if someone asks you, what did you do on the weekends? I went to a conference about effective altruism. Well, effective altruism, what's that? Well, then that's a website that will tell them. So effectivealtruism.com, that's a book that the founder of our organisation wrote, and that is also going to go through some of these ideas in more detail. But yeah, make sure that you don't just think about these ideas, make sure that you actually act on them, because it's only by acting on them that we're going to make the world a better place. So thanks very much for listening to me. I'll be around like after the conference and also available to take questions at the one of the last sessions. I'm sorry that I've run out of time now, so I can't take any more questions. I would have loved to go through criticisms. So remember I said, always keep an open mind. Maybe you guys can think of some of the things that are wrong with what I've said. And maybe we can talk about that later on. But in the meantime, thanks very much for listening, and I hope you've got something out of this. Definitely check out some of these sites. I've been Sam. Thank you very much for listening. Cheers.